Good morning, children. Today in Social Science and History in Class 9, the chapter Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution, we'll take up the topic that is the formation of the provisional government. That is, after February Revolution of 1917, what were the changes that took place? Now, we see that one impact of the February Revolution of 1917 was the Tsar abdicated on the 2nd of March 1917. And that meant that this was a very major change that took place in Russia. That was the end of the monarchy system. Now, in the provisional government that came to be formed, provisional, that means arrangements had to be made for the government, and in this there were people from the army officials were included in the provisional government, landowners and the industrialists. All of them played an important role in the formation of this provisional government. Because the system of monarchy had come to an end, the Tsar had already abdicated, so obviously there had to be a government that would look after the people and look after all the matters pertaining to the country. So we see that gradually freedom was given to the people. That is, on public meetings and associations, there used to be restrictions that were removed. So now people were free to hold public meetings. They were free to form associations and unions. Like the Petrograd Soviet, it was set up, although at this point of time that there was no common system of election. Now we see that the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin, he returned to Russia from his exile in April 1917. That means he was, you can say, turned out of the country. He was expected to stay out of the country because of his ideas. So he returned in April 1917. And Lenin and the group, the Bolsheviks that is, they all opposed war since 1914, because a war brings destruction, it leads to loss of human life and so much other destruction and devastation. So from 1914 onwards, Lenin and his supporters were opposing the war. And now they felt that it was the right time for the Soviets to take over power. So by his return, major changes took place in Russia. Now, when he returned in April 1917, there were 3 demands that he put across, that he forwarded, and these 3 demands that came to be known as Lenin's April thesis. These 3 were: 1, the war to be brought to a close; 2nd, land to be transferred to the peasants. Peasants, either they worked as, they gave the rent to the landowners, so they wanted this redistribution. And thirdly, the banks to be nationalized. That means that they should come under state ownership. So this was what Lenin's April thesis consisted of, that the war to be brought to an end, land to be transferred to the peasants, and banks to be nationalized. So these 3 demands, which became famous as Lenin's April thesis. Now, workers' movement and the impact it had. Now, in the industrial areas, that is where the industries were there, where the factories were there, committees came to be formed, groups came to be formed. Then another major impact was that the trade unions increased in number so that they could be united for their rights. Then in the army, soldiers' committees were also formed. And then we see that in June 1917, 500 Soviets sent representatives to an All-Russia Congress of Soviets. That means there was a gathering. So they sent their representatives to speak on their behalf. Now, when we see that Lenin had returned in April 1917, and with that, his ideas were made more popular among the people. One major change that he wanted that the Bolshevik party should be renamed as the Communist Party, so that the ideas which they followed, those could be made popular. Now, here the provisional government which had been formed, they resisted. They did not quite agree with the ideas of Lenin. They resisted the effort of workers to run the factories. They began to arrest leaders. And the demonstrations which were organized by the Bolsheviks in July 1917 came to be repressed. So gradually we see that Lenin rose to power. The Bolshevik, he was the leader of the Bolshevik party, but the provisional government and the Bolshevik party had differences regarding the rule in the country. Then we had peasants and there's socialist revolutionary leaders who insisted that land should be redistributed. That is, the land should be given to the peasants. And for this, land committees came to be formed. And between July and September 1917, peasants seized land by force. Now we come to see that already all the conflict that was going on between provisional government and the Bolsheviks increased in number. Now we had the revolution of October 1917. At this point of time, the main fear that Lenin had was that the provisional government would set up dictatorship, that again they will be having an individual ruling, so which they did not want that form of dictatorship to be established in Russia. On 16th of October 1917, Lenin compelled the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of power in the country. That means that they should take over the government. Military Revolutionary Committee was appointed and by the Soviet under Leon Trotsky to organize the seizure of power. An uprising on 24th of October 1917, an uprising began, and the Prime Minister at that time, Kerensky, he summoned troops because he feared that there is going to be a lot of trouble. So he summoned the troops, and the buildings where two Bolshevik newspapers were there, they were seized so that no papers could be published. Then troops were sent to take over the telephone and telegraph offices and protect Winter Palace. They had anticipated that there is going to be some problem. So in order to prevent that from happening, they sent their own troops so that all this could be controlled. The Military Revolutionary Committee ordered the government offices to be captured and ministers to be arrested. So the conflict kept on increasing more and more. And finally, by December 1917, the Bolshevik Party controlled the Moscow-Petrograd area. So this was so we see that one major change that took place is the February Revolution. Although people were against it, opposing the rule of the Tsar, his policies, and that they were so suppressed that they were not able. The workers suffered because of low wages, poor working conditions, and the peasants suffered because they did not own the land. So gradually we see that the level of discontentment and dissatisfaction increased to such a great extent that we had the February Revolution by the people in 1917, after which a provisional government was formed, where people now were able to form associations, public meetings could be there, which was not allowed earlier on. Trade unions increased in number also. So this all had a great impact also. And then the return of Lenin to Russia in April 1917 with his three demands: that the war to be brought to an end, the land to be transferred to the peasants, and banks to be nationalized. But Lenin's ideas, he was the leader of the Bolshevik Party, Lenin's ideas differed from that of the provisional government. Lenin felt that a dictatorship will be established by them, so he did not want that to happen. So that resulted in the revolution of October 1917. And with this event of October 1917, finally the Bolsheviks controlled the Moscow-Petrograd area.